B'siyata d'shmaya, we're going to learn Yoma Daf Peiches. We're going to start from the sixth last of the very narrow lines on Daf Peizayin Omid Beis. Tanan Hossam, we learnt in a mission in Masechet Tainis, Bishleisha Prokim Bashana, on 3 occasions of the year, Koyanim Noisim Eskapeim is what we call Duchening Birchas Koyanim, that normally we know that the Koyanim do not do Birchas Koyanim Mincha time, only Shachris time, because Mincha time is a time where people often are intoxicated and they cannot do Birchas Koyanim. It's something which would not apply in the mornings. However, there are 3 occasions in the year where we're not concerned of people being intoxicated. And on those 3 times, then the Koyanim do Birchas Koyanim Arba Pomim Ba'yom. It could be up to 4 times a day, not always, but it could be up to 4 times a day. B'shachris, as with every day. B'musaf, on those days that there are musaf. We'll soon see what these 3 times are, what these 3 occasions are. Not all of them have musaf, but where there's musaf, there's birchas koyanim at musaf. B'mincha, they all have mincha. Or b'ne'ilas sha'orim, and by ne'ilah they do birchas koyanim. Ve'elu hein shloisha prokim. And what are those 3 occasions? Betanios, on those fast days when there was a drought, and we're going to learn about this in Masechet Tainis, then they would make the people fast. On those fast days when nobody's intoxicated, then they can say the Birchas Koyanim, they can do Birchas Koyanim even in the afternoon. Ma'amodois, and this is also a sugi we're going to learn about in Tainis Daf Chavov, but just very bekitza. When a person brings a korban, he has to be there with his korban when it's being brought. The korban tomid is brought on behalf of the entire Klal Yisrael. So what they did was they split up their 24 groups that corresponded to the 24 groups of Koyanim, and there were representatives of Klal Yisrael in these groups. Part of these groups were actually present in the Beis Hamikdash when the korban tomid was being offered, and part of these people, they were not there, but they would be in their respective places, and they would daven that the korbanos should be received in Shemaim. And by the Tainios and the Ma'amodos, there was no musaf. So obviously there, they wouldn't be davening 4 times, they wouldn't be doing Birchas Koyanim 4 times a day. On Yom Kippur, when you've got also musaf, then you would have 4 times Birchas Koyanim in a day. So that's the Tainis and the Ma'amodos, that these people who would be doing their Ma'amodos, they would be davening and they would be fasting on these 4 days from Monday through to Thursday on their week, and since they would be fasting, there was no issue of saying Birchas Koyanim, Ubeyom Kippurim, and on Yom Kippur, obviously it was a fast day, and there was no problem with getting intoxicated, and one could say Birchas Koyanim on all the tefillas of the day, a total of 4. And now the Gemara says, what's my Ne'ilas Sha'orim? There's this concept of Ne'ilas Sha'orim. We saw that the 4 tefillos are Shachris, Musaf, Mincha, Ne'ilas HaSha'orim. So why it's called Ne'ilas HaSha'orim, there Rashi brings from Yerushalmi that it might be referring to the time where the gates of heaven are closing, or it could be the time that the gates of the Azara and the Beis Hamikdash are closing. But what would they do? What was this Ne'ilas Sha'orim? My Ne'ilas Sha'orim, Rav Omar Tzloisa Yisirasa. Rav says it was an extra tefillah. Or Shmuel Omar, Shmuel says it was not an extra tefillah, just they would add on an extra paragraph into, they would say an extra paragraph, it wouldn't be a whole tefillah. What would they say? They would say, Ma'onu mechayenu. And we say this tefillah at the end of Ne'ilah, and we also say it every morning, Ma'onu mechayenu mechazenu matzidkenu masenu manoima lefanecha Hashem Elokeinu haloi kol hagiborim ka'ayin lefanecha, etc. It's familiar with all of us. Asks the Gemara Meisvei, we're going to ask a question against Shmuel. Shmuel said that there was no tefillah called Ne'ilah. There was just, they would say this paragraph of Ma'onu mechayenu. And we're going to ask a question against this. It says in the Brisa, Oir Yoma Kippurim, on the night of Yom Kippur, Nispalil Sheva Umisvade. He says a Sheva brachos, which has 7 brachos in it, the 3 brachos of every Shemoneh Esrei at the beginning, the 3 at the end, and 1 bracha in the middle. Umisvada, and he has to say vidya, and we've already seen previously that an individual says it at the end of the Shemoneh Esrei, and the Shliach Tzibur says it when he's doing the Chazaras Hashatz, then he's doing it in the middle bracha. But Shachris, the same applies to Shachris, Mispadil Sheva Umisvada, he says the Shemoneh Esrei of 7 brachas and vidui. But Musaf Mispadil Sheva Umisvada, but Mincha Mispadil Sheva Umisvada, B'ne'ilah Mispalil Sheva Umisvada. it says explicitly that Ne'ilah is a tefillah with 7 brachas. Now the Gaon leaves out till the end of the line. V'choisem b'vidui divrei Reb Meir. According to Reb Meir, he says that the end of the vidui, he finishes with a bracha by Ne'ilah. Rashi says this is just by Ne'ilah, that by Ne'ilah, when you're saying the vidui, you finish off with a bracha. And instead of finishing the middle tefillah, the middle bracha, with Mekadesh Yisrael v'Yom Kippurim, we finish it with the bracha of Hokel HaSalchon. And there are other explanations here, but that's the most basic reading. The Chachomim say, Mispalel Sheva, that they also agree that Ne'ilah is a tefillah with 7 brachas. Just he argues with the Meir. Meir says you have to finish the vidui with a bracha on the vidui, as we says Hokel HaSalchon, etc. The Chachomim say you don't have to finish that way, you can finish that way. But either way, both Reb Meir and the Chachomim hold that Ne'ilah is a whole tefillah. Tiyufta de Shmuel, Tiyufta, indeed it's a refutation against Shmuel. Continues the Gemara. Ula barav nochis kamei Rava. Ula, the son of Rav, he went down, and the Shliach Tzibur is often called going down because the place where the Shliach Tzibur stood was a little bit lower because of the pasuk Mimamakim Karasicha Hashem. So very often a Shliach Tzibur is called that he went down to the Amud, and this Ula bar Rav, he was the Shliach Tzibur before Rava. Pasach, and he began the middle bracha of Ne'ilah with Ba'atav v'Chartonu. He started with Ba'atav v'Chartonu like the middle bracha does on all the other tefillahs of Yom Kippur. V'siyem, and he ended off the middle bracha b'meh anu u'meh chayenu, etc. V'shavchei, and Rava praised him for doing that. And some Mefarshim explained that he was worthy of praise because he managed to do also what Rav held and also what Shmuel held. Also that Rav held that Ne'ilah was a whole tefillah, and also Shmuel because he made sure to add in the Ma'onu Mechayenu. Continues the Gemara. Rav Huna Breder of Nosson Omar, V'yochid oimra achar tfilasei. We already said before that a yochid says the vidui at the end of the Shmoneh Esrei, not in the middle bracha. So this tefillah of Ma'onu Mechayenu, when for the quiet Shmoneh Esrei, the Shmoneh Esrei of the Yochid, of the individual, then he says the Ma'onu Mechayenu at the end of his Shmoneh Esrei, and it's said together with the Vidui. Continues the Gemara, Omar Rav, Tfilas Ne'ilah Poiteres Es Shel Arvis. The Ne'ilah davening, which is said at the end of the day, it actually exempts a person from having to daven Ma'ariv. Every person is obligated to daven Ma'ariv, but once he said Ne'ilah, he doesn't need to say Ma'ariv. And the reason for that is because Rav holds that the time, and it's going to be a machlokes, but the time to say Ne'ilah is actually after the end of Yom Kippur, after it's already night. That means the time of Ne'ilah is the same time as Ma'ariv. So we can understand that if you say Ne'ilah, you don't need to daven Ma'ariv. Rav Letame, and Rav is following his own opinion to Omar. He said before that Ne'ilah was tzloisi yiserahi. Ne'ilah was not just saying a paragraph Ma'onu Mechayenu, it was a whole tefillah. And since he davened this whole tefillah, and he held that you daven it after Tzeis HaKichovim, Sulei Tzorich, he does not need to say another Shmoneh Esrei that night. Says the Gemara, I don't understand. How can you, Rav, say that davening Ne'ilah exempts you from the obligation of davening Ma'ariv? Whoever said there was an obligation of davening Ma'ariv? Umi Omar Rav hachi, v'Omar Rav, did Rav not say halacha k'divrei ha'omer tfilas arvis reshus? Does Rav not hold that tfilas arvis is optional? You can choose to daven Ma'ariv, but you don't have to daven Ma'ariv. And since you don't have to daven Ma'ariv, how can you say that Ne'ilah exempts it? Says the Gemara, L'divrei ha'omer chayva ka'omar. Rav was just saying, he was saying that I hold you don't need to daven Ma'ariv whenever. But even those who say that there's an obligation to daven Ma'ariv, I, Rav, hold that according to them, if you daven Ne'ilah, which is a tefillah, which is said in the night, then they do not need to daven Ma'ariv. And now the Gemara is asking a question against Rav from a Braisa, Meisvei. Oyer Yom Kippurim, on the night of Yom Kippur, Mispalel Sheva u'Misvade. 7 brachas with a vidui. Shachris Sheva u'Misvade, Musaf Sheva u'Misvade, B'Ne'ilah Mispadel Sheva u'Misvade, Arvis Mispadel Sheva, Me'en Shmoneh Esrei. That means we see in this brisa that besides for Ne'ilah, you also daven Ma'ariv. Just the Ma'ariv is not the regular Ma'ariv of 19 brachas. or let's call it Shmoneh Esrei, 18, discussed elsewhere in Shas when it became 19, but it's called Shmoneh Esrei. But instead of saying that all the middle brachas, it's one bracha in the middle, which is Ma'ein Shmoneh Esrei. It's called Havinenu, which is a shortened version, an abridged version of the entire Shmoneh Esrei. Because it's Motzi Yom Kippur, people were already tired and hungry, so they made Ma'ariv shorter. It's an abridged version of the regular Shmoneh Esrei. Reb Chanina ben Gamliel Mishum Avoisov. Chanina ben Gamliel said in the name of his ancestors, Mispanel Shmoneh Esrei Shleimos, that the Ma'ariv has to be a full Ma'ariv. You can't say the abridged version. It's Motzi Yom Kippur. You have to say Havdalah, which what we know as Atochin Antonu. In the Havinenu version, there's no Atochin Antonu, and therefore on Motzei Shabbos, Motzei Yom Tov, Motzei Yom Kippur, you cannot say Havinenu. You have to say the entire Shmoneh Esrei. But either way, we see in this brisa that besides for Ne'ilah, one also davens Ma'ariv, and that's contrary to what Rav said, that if you daven Ne'ilah, you don't need to daven Ma'ariv. Says the Gemara, Tanoihi. You're right, and it's actually a machlokes Tanoim. Rav is following one Tana, and there's a brisa that says a different opinion. The Tanya we learnt in the brisa. And we're actually going to see in this brisa that there's an opinion that holds that the time to say Ne'ilah is actually in the night, after Seis HaKechovim at the end of Yom Kippur, and others hold no. There's going to be a machlokes when is the time to say Ne'ilah. Is it to say Ne'ilah towards the end of the day, but it's still on Yom Kippur, and then it clearly cannot exempt you from Ma'ariv, or was it said at the time of Ma'ariv? The Tanya we learnt in a brisa, Kol Chayve Tvilos, all those people who have a chiyuv to toivel, Toivlim Kedarkom B'Yom Kippurim, they can toivel as usual on Yom Kippur. The issa to wash oneself is only for the sake of pleasure, since over here he's washing himself, he's immersing himself purely to become Tohir. There's no problem with doing that on Yom Kippur. And this is all the chayve tvilos, that almost all people who need tvilah, the time of the tvilah is in the day. The exception to that is nida v'yoledes, that they tovel at night, on the night after the 7 days, or the night after the days of counting. So nida v'yoledes, toveles kedarkon b'leila Yom Kippurim. They tovel in a normal manner on the night of Yom Kippur. Now, why these people should be allowed to tovel then is a challenge. So if you hold that Tvila Bizmano mitzvah, we're soon going to learn about that, were you to hold that Tvila Bizmano is a mitzvah, then the very fact that now is the time, therefore you can do it even on Yom Kippur. If you don't hold Tvila Bizmano mitzvah, then there's a discussion, why should they be allowed to tovel on Yom Kippur? What's it serving? What purpose does it serve? And Rashi, Masechet Shabbos, Daf Kuf Chaf Aleph, seems to say that the reason they're allowed to tovel is in order that they should be allowed to eat from Truma in the night after they tovel, the Motzi Yom Kippur, they want to eat trumas and eat tyrus and eat things that they couldn't eat while they were tomei, and therefore they were allowed to go to the mikveh. So that's talking about all the other people who tovel. Bal Keri tovel v'hoylech ad hamincha. The Tanakhama say that if somebody became a Bal Keri on Yom Kippur, he can only tovel until mincha. But once he's daven mincha, and then he becomes tomei, if he becomes tomei after he's daven mincha, he can no longer go to the mikveh, he has to wait till the night. That's the Tanakhama. Rabbi Yosi says, kol hayom kulay, then he can tovel for his keri the whole day, till the end of Yom Kippur. Now what are they arguing about? They're arguing exactly in what we said before. According to the Tanakhama, the time to say Ne'ilah is only after Nacht. And therefore, once you've davened Mincha, the fact that he's become a Bal Keri, it doesn't matter. So what? There's no more tefillos. The problem with Keri is that a person who's a Bal Keri should not really daven. And on Yom Kippur, we want people to daven appropriately, so go to the mikveh. But if you've already davened mincha, and Ne'ilah you only daven after the end of Yom Kippur, why do you have to go to the mikveh on Yom Kippur? He can tovel after the end of Yom Kippur. That's why the Tanakhama say, only ad mincha. Rabbi Yosi, however, argues, and says no. Rabbi Yosi says that kol hayom, even after mincha, the time to say Ne'ilah is on Yom Kippur. And since the time to say Ne'ilah is on Yom Kippur, then after mincha, if he became a Bal Keri, he hasn't yet daven Ne'ilah, go to the mikveh now in order that he can daven Ne'ilah. So Rav, who said before that Ne'ilah exempts a person from Ma'ariv, he obviously holds, like the Tanakhama hold here, that the time of Ne'ilah is after Nacht. And now the Gemara is asking a seeming contradiction, or a minu. There's another brisa that seems to be exactly the opposite of this first brisa. Hazov, Hazov, Amatzir, Amatziras, Uboil Nidot, Meimes. These are all people who are Tomei and need to go to the mikveh at some point. Toivlim Kedarkom B'Yom Kippurim. They're allowed to toivel on Yom Kippur. Nidav Yuledes, where they are the only two that don't toivel on the day of Yom Kippur, because they never toivel in the day, they toivel in the night. Toivel is Kedarkon B'Leila Yom Kippurim. As far as that's concerned, there's no difference between the two brises. The difference is going to be regarding the Balkeri. In this brisa, Balkeri toivel v'hoilech kol hayom kuloi. Here we have a Tanakama, a Chachomim, who say that you can toivel the whole day. Rabbi Yossi says, Min mincha l'mayla ein yochel litvel. Once you've davened mincha, the Balkeri cannot go to the mikveh anymore. So we have a contradiction in the Rabbanon and a contradiction in Rabbi Yossi. In the first brisa, the Tanakama said that you can only go to the mikveh till he's davened mincha, and Rabbi Yossi says the whole day. In the second brisa, the Tanakama say the whole day, and Rabbi Yossi says till mincha. Says the Gemara loy kashya. Ha de tzoli tfilas ne'ilah, ha de loy tzoli. That means for now the Gemara is only focusing on the contradiction in Rabbi Yossi. In the first brisa, Rabbi Yossi said he can go to the mikveh, Balkeri can go to the mikveh the whole day, even after davening mincha. The second brisa says only till mincha. Says the Gemara, what it means is that in the first brisa that says he can go to the mikveh the whole day, even after mincha, because he hasn't yet davened the ilah. He's got to daven the ilah, you can go to mikveh. The second brisa, when it says ad mincha, it means mincha time. In the event that he davened the ilah by mincha time, he's now finished davening the ilah. The second brisa is talking about when he's finished davening the ilah. After you finish davening the ilah and he then becomes a Balkeri, there's no reason to go to the mikveh yet. He can wait till after Yom Kippur. So now the Gemara is saying, Idet Soli, if the second brisa is talking about that he already davened Ne'ilah mincha time, and that's why according to Rabbi Yossi, you can't go to the mikveh anymore, Mai Tamayu D'Rabbanon. How are we going to understand the Tanakama who say that he can go to the mikveh even afterwards? Kol hayom? Answers the Gemara, Kosover Rabbanon, Tvila Bizmano Mitzvah. The reason he can go to mikveh is not because he needs to daven, but because there's a mitzvah to go to the mikveh at the first opportune time. A Balkeri, the time to go to mikveh is when he becomes a Balkeri. Straight afterwards he should go into the mikveh, he should toivel. And therefore the Tanakama of the second brisa say the whole day he can go to the mikveh. So to summarize, the first brisa, both Tanakama and Rabbi Yossi hold that there's no tvila bizmano mitzvah. It's only an issue of, do you still have a tefillah to daven? So Rabbi Yossi says you can go to the mikveh the whole day because he hasn't yet davened the ilah. Tanakama say that the time of davening the ilah is only after nacht, and therefore you don't need to go to the mikveh before Ne'ilah on Yom Kippur. The second brisa, however, they both agree that the time to daven Ne'ilah is in the day. So the two Rabbi Yossis are actually not arguing with each other. Rabbi Yossi in the first brisa says that he hasn't yet davened the ilah, and that's why he can still go to the mikveh. And in the second brisa he says you've already davened the ilah. But the Tanakamas of the two brisas are actually arguing with each other. The Tanakama of the first brisa holds that we don't say tvila bizmano mitzvah, and that's why you can only go to the mikveh till mincha. And he holds that the time to daven ne'ilah is after nacht. The Tanakama in the second brisa hold that the time to daven Ne'ilah is in the day, and we're talking about that he's already davened Ne'ilah, and the reason you can toivel the whole day is because of Tvila Bizmano Mitzvah. That means the point of argument in the first brisa is when is the time to daven Ne'ilah? Is it after Nacht or before Nacht? The point of the Machlokas in the second brisa is there Tvila Bizmano Mitzvah or not Tvila Bizmano Mitzvah? So now the Gemara is asking, Mechlal de Rabbi Yossi Sovar, if you say that the reason in the second brisa the Tanakama say you can go to the mikveh even after you've davened the ilah because tvila bizmano mitzvah, and Rabbi Yossi says in the second brisa that you can only go to the mikveh till mincha time, assuming you've davened the ilah mincha time, then after the ilah you can no longer go to the tvila. What's with tvila bizmano? So obviously Rabbi Yossi holds that there's no mitzvah to toivel bizman. Michlal Rabbi Yossi Sava lav mitzvah, and we have an issue with this. Well, Tanya, we've learnt in the brisa, Harei shoyoch shem kosov al basar. If somebody had one of Hashem's names written on his skin, Harei ze lo yirchatz v'lo yosuch. He should not wash himself nor anoint himself because he's going to rub out Hashem's name. Chas v'shalom. V'lo yamoid b'mokim tatinofus. He should not stand in a place where it's inappropriate for the name to be. For the Hashem's name to be. It's disrespectful. And in other places in Shas, the Gemara discusses what's called Mekaymus Hatinofis. Nizdamno loy tvilas mitzvah. What happens if this person who has Hashem's name written on his flesh has a mitzvah to go to the mikvah? The Tanakhama say, gemi v'yered. Go find yourself a blade of reed grass to wrap round the name and then go into the mikvah. And hopefully this reed will prevent the water from rubbing out the name. Obviously this reed grass has to be lightly placed, because if it's very firmly and tightly on the body, it will be a chatzitza. And this is all things that we've already learnt about in Masechet Shabbos Daf Kuf Chaf Amud Beis. But the Tanakhama say, even though it's a tvilas mitzvah, don't go into the mikveh without finding this reed grass to put on the name. The fact that if you have to start looking for this reed grass, you may not find it on time and you'll have to postpone the tvila, okay, they don't hold that tvila bismano mitzvah. The Tanakhama of that brisa. Rabbi Yossi says no. Rabbi Yossi says if I'm going to trouble you to find this reed grass, you might miss the time of going to the mikveh. And going to the mikveh on time is a mitzvah. So Rabbi Yossi says, Rabbi Yossi Omer, Yored v'toivel kadarkoi, you should go down a normal way into the mikveh. Or bilvad shalei shavshef, make sure you don't rub the name. V'kaimelon, it's been established elsewhere in the Gemara in Shabbos Daf Kuf Chof Aleph. The betvila bismano mitzvah, they're arguing, is there a mitzvah to go to the mikveh at the first possible time or not? So you see clearly, Rabbi Yossi says tvila bismano mitzvah. If tvila bismano mitzvah, why in the second brisa does Rabbi Yossi say that he can only go to the mikveh till he's daven the ilah? Answers the Gemara a very interesting answer. The two Rabbi Yossis are not the same Rabbi Yossi. Hahi Rabbi Yossi bar Yehudahi. The Rabbi Yossi in the brisa that says that you can only go to the mikveh till you've daven the ilah is Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda. The Tanya we learnt in the brisa, Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda oimer dayo letvila shetei ba'achreina. We're talking about a woman who's got all sorts of different times and confusions. When is the time for her to go to the mikveh? And if you hold tvila bismano mitzvah, then every time that it could be the time for her to go to mikveh, she has to go. Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda says no, just wait till the last possible time, just go then. He doesn't hold tvila bismano mitzvah. However, the Rabbi Yossi who says that you don't need to wrap a gemi around Hashem's name and you can just go into the mikveh, that's the Rabbi Yossi who says tvila bismano mitzvah. That's not Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda. It's a different Rabbi Yossi. It's a Rabbi Yossi ben Chalafta. Continues the Gemara. Tonu Rabbanon haroya keri b'yom Kippurim. If somebody becomes tomei with a bal keri on Yom Kippur, yered v'toivel, he can toivel on Yom Kippur. And in the evening, Yeshavshef, he should rub his body with hot water, removing any foreign substances that could be a chatzitza. Asks the Gemara, I don't understand. Le'erev, you're going to rub yourself clean from any dirt and foreign substances in the evening after you've toiveled? My da'ava, you've already been in the mikveh. It's too late to remove chatzitzas after you've been in the mikveh. Says the Gemara, le'ema, what the brisa means is mibo erev yeshavshef. Make sure that before the onset of Yom Kippur that you've cleaned yourself very well with hot water. There should be no chatzitzas. So in the event that this person chas v'shalom becomes a bal keri, he'll be able to go to the mikveh without having an issue of chatzitza. Continues the Gemara, Tani Tana Kameder of Nachman, the one that was teaching the brises before of Nachman, said as follows: Haroya keri b'yom Kippurim. If somebody becomes a bal keri on Yom Kippur, avoinosav mechulim loy. His averos have all been forgiven. It's a good sign. It's a sign that he's going to see offspring and live long days. And Rashi says this based on a pasuk. Yireh zera yarich yomim. It's a pasuk in Yeshaya. Asks the Gemara of Tanya, did we not learn in another brisa that Avonosov Zdurim, that somebody who becomes a bal keri on Yom Kippur, then his averos are arranged before the heavenly courts, which means he's going to be judged for them, and on the contrary, that's a very bad sign. Says the Gemara, no. When it says Sadurim, that they're arranged, it doesn't mean arranged in order to be judged by them. It means arranged, Listurim limochil, because the way that averos get forgiven is they get sorted out, rishoin, and they get arranged in order to be forgiven one by one. Continues the Gemara, Tana de Rabbi Shmuel, Haroya keri b'yom Kippurim. If somebody becomes a bal keri on Yom Kippur, yida kol hashana kula. The whole year he should be afraid. Maybe Hashem is showing him, I don't want your fast. We know that the fast day means that a person has to have the 5 inuyim, the 5 afflictions that apply to Yom Kippur that we learnt about at the beginning of this perek, and one of them is not having these pleasures that typically a Baal Keri would have. And here Hashem is saying, you're trying to afflict yourself by abstaining from these pleasures. I'm not interested in that. Here you go, take the pleasure. So he should be concerned the whole year. Vim also lo yishana, and if he lives out the year, muftach lo yishu ben olam haba, he can be assured that he's a proper tzaddik and he's got a share in the world to come. Because then it's as if Hashem is saying, you're such a big tzaddik that you tried your best to keep to the afflictions. I want to give you this pleasure anyway, and Hashem gives him that pleasure, and he becomes a Baal Keri. And the Meforshim ask, how can it be that Hashem is rewarding somebody by doing something which is intrinsically Tomei? It's a discussion in the Meforshim. Says the Gemara, Omer of Nachman by Yitzchok, Teida, you should know that this is so, that somebody who survives the year, then the fact that he was a Baal Keri on Yom Kippur is a sign that he's got a share in the world to come. Shekol ha'olam kulo roiv, because the whole world was deprived of this type of pleasure. V'hu sovea, and nonetheless he was not deprived by it. This must mean that he's a big tzaddik. That's how the Bach seems to understand Rashi. Ki also Rav Dimi, when Rav Dimi came from Eretz Yisrael to Bovel, then Omar, he said that this person who sees a Baal Keri on Yom Kippur and survives the year, and obviously it's going to turn out that it was a good sign, not a bad sign, then Mapish Chaya, he's going to live long, Sagei or Masgei, he's going to multiply and multiply, he's going to have children and grandchildren, and this is learnt from the Pasuk in Yeshaya, Yireh Zera Yarich Yomim. Hadron Aloch Yoma Kippurim, B'siyata Deshmai, we finished Perek Yoma Kippurim, and in Mirza Hashem we're going to Chazorah of Perek Yoma Kippurim, Uslika lo Masechet Yoma, B'siyata Deshmai, we finished the whole Masechet Yoma, and in Mirza Hashem we're going to do Chazorah on Masechet Yoma, and in Mirza Hashem, in the next year we're going to start Masechet Sukkah, B'siyata Deshmai.